The sun was beginning to set when the five friends arrived at the isolated cabin in the middle of the forest. The dirt road leading to the cabin was winding and covered in dry leaves, which crackled under the car's wheels. The sounds of nature, which had previously been a relaxing backdrop, now seemed strangely silent, as if the forest were watching the group. The cabin was an old structure, with dark, weathered wood that seemed to absorb the evening light. The roof, covered in broken tiles and moss, had an air of abandonment. The windows were small and framed with worn-out wood, some of them with cracked or dirty glass, which added to the gloomy appearance of the place. The garden, if it could be called that, was filled with wild bushes and weeds, and an air of neglect hung in the atmosphere. Lucas, the group leader, parked the car and looked at the cabin with a nervous smile. "Hey guys, what do you think of our weekend retreat?" His voice carried a mix of enthusiasm and insecurity. Anna, with her lively spirit, was the first to get out of the car. "It looks perfect. A bit rustic, but nothing that a little goodwill can't fix." Pedro, the most skeptical of the group, raised an eyebrow and looked at the cabin with suspicion. "If you think it's perfect, then I'm the next one to become a cave explorer. Let's see if we find any charm around here." Beatriz, with her attentive and investigative gaze, started taking her things out of the car. "I think it just needs a bit of cleaning and some TLC. It could be quite fun." Marcos, the most reserved of the group, remained silent while helping unload the luggage. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were observing the surrounding forest with a peculiar curiosity. Inside the cabin, the smell of aged wood and mold was noticeable. The interior was decorated with old, worn furniture that seemed to belong to a bygone era. The stone fireplace was large and imposing, with a layer of ashes showing signs of old use. The walls were adorned with tapestries and black and white photos of unknown people, creating a sense of being watched. The group spread out through the cabin, trying to make the environment to their liking. Lucas and Pedro went to the kitchen, where they started preparing dinner. Anna and Beatriz took care of arranging the bedrooms, while Marcos went off to explore the attic, which seemed to have been closed off for many years. "Hey, Lucas, can you help me with these boxes?" Anna called out, stacking some boxes of clothes and utensils in the living room. "Sure, I'm on my way," Lucas replied with a forced smile as he approached. Marcos, for his part, found an old ladder and began to climb up to the attic. The ladder creaked with each step, and the attic's darkness seemed to swallow the light from the cabin's lamps. When Marcos reached the top, he found a dusty space filled with furniture covered in white sheets. Among the furniture was an old wooden box with a rusty lock. As the group settled in, small interactions began to reveal aspects of their personalities. Lucas, the natural leader, tried to keep the group's morale high despite his own anxiety about the place. Anna was the cheerleader, always looking for a reason to smile and keep the mood light. Pedro was the skeptic and often made sarcastic jokes, but deep down, he was as interested as the others in making the most of the weekend. Beatriz, with her investigative nature, always seemed a step ahead, looking for any detail that could enhance their experience in the cabin. Marcos, however, was the enigma of the group. His reserved behavior and eyes that seemed to capture every detail of the forest and cabin gave the impression that he was harboring a secret. As evening fell, the cabin was lit by a soft glow from candles, and the first night settled in with a sense of anticipation. The group gathered around the fireplace, chatting and planning activities for the next day. The atmosphere felt relaxed, but the cabin's isolation and the growing darkness outside added a touch of unease to the scene. When everyone had settled in for the night, a sense of strangeness began to creep in. The wind whistled through the cabin's gaps, and the sound of the trees swaying seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The first night in the cabin was just beginning, and with it, the start of something that would turn a simple weekend into a nightmare. Everything went smoothly without major incidents, but at dawn, small signs that something was wrong began to manifest. Anna woke up early before the others, and decided to explore the surroundings. Upon leaving, she noticed that the garden was even more untidy than before, with bushes seeming to have grown wildly overnight. A chill ran down her spine as she saw irregularly sized footprints in the damp soil, as if someone had walked around the cabin. However, when she tried to follow the footprints, they disappeared into the dense vegetation. Inside the cabin, while Lucas was preparing breakfast, he noticed something peculiar. The pantry door was open, and he was sure he had closed it the night before. He thought it could have been a slip-up by someone in the group, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave him. Small objects like a spoon and a tea packet were out of place. Lucas tried to convince himself they were just insignificant details, but the discomfort persisted. Pedro and Beatriz, upon waking, found a handwritten note on the kitchen table with the message, "Don't stay outside after dark. Something is approaching." The note was crumpled and seemed to have been written hastily, which intensified the mystery. Everyone began speculating about the origin of the note, but no one recognized it. Lucas tried to stay calm and suggested that the note might be someone's idea of a joke. However, the tension among the friends began to rise. Pedro mocked the situation, saying it was just an attempt to scare them. Who would leave a note like this? And why would it be a problem if we went outside? He taunted, trying to downplay the impact. Anna, however, was visibly disturbed. "Something's not right," she said, anxiously looking out the window. "I found strange footprints outside." Beatriz started analyzing the note and the misplaced objects. "We need to consider all possibilities," she suggested, trying to stay rational, but her expression was filled with concern. Marcos, as usual, observed the situation from a distance, with a thoughtful silence. His eyes didn't seem worried, but his demeanor held an unsettling quality, as if he knew something the others did not. The uncomfortable atmosphere within the group intensified throughout the day. While they tried to keep their minds occupied, Pedro decided to explore the forest. He was accompanied by a group of passing dogs, so he felt relatively safe. However, when he didn't return for lunch, the others began to worry. By evening, Lucas and Anna decided to search for him. They found Pedro in the forest, in a state of panic, standing near a clearing. He was sweating, and his expression was one of sheer terror. "There was something there," he said, his voice trembling. "Something was watching me. I saw a shadow moving between the trees." Pedro tried to explain that he had seen something moving among the trees, but his account was confused and desperate. While the others tried to calm him and bring him back to the cabin, Beatriz found a strange object at the place where Pedro had been, an old knife covered with what appeared to be dried blood. Concern quickly turned to fear when, that night, one of the friends disappeared. Marcos was the first to notice Pedro's absence and found his cell phone in the cabin, with disturbing text messages sent from an unknown number. The last message read, "You are closer than you think." The tension in the cabin was palpable. During the night, as the group tried to rest, strange sounds echoed through the cabin. The sound of heavy footsteps and creaks, as if someone was walking through the halls, disturbed the friends' sleep. Anna, in a moment of panic, decided to investigate and found the attic door slightly open, even though she was sure it had been closed before. In the attic, the atmosphere was oppressive. Anna's flashlight flickered and cast unsettling shadows on the walls. She found the wooden box Marcos had discovered earlier, now open, revealing personal items from all the group members. Photos, letters, and other intimate objects. Fear intensified when Anna noticed a recent photo of Pedro, apparently taken from outside the cabin, with a look of terror on his face. When Anna returned to the others, the group was in an uproar. "We're not alone," she said, her voice trembling. "Someone is here with us." With a growing sense of threat and increasingly strange events, suspicion among the friends began to settle in. The idea that one of them could be behind the happenings took over the discussions. Each began to suspect the others, and the friendship among them started to fray. Lucas tried to maintain order and cohesion within the group, but the pressure was becoming unbearable. Anna and Beatriz argued about what should be done, while Marcos remained silent, observing everything with an intriguing calmness. The tension mounted, and every noise in the cabin made the friends jump in fright. As the night progressed, Fear became a constant, and the sense that something terrible was about to happen hung in the air. The group tried to stay united, but the feeling of being watched and the presence of unknown dangers created an increasingly oppressive atmosphere. The second day at the cabin began with an atmosphere charged with fear. The group was trying to regain their composure after the strange events and Pedro's disappearance, but the sense of imminent danger continued to hang over them. Conversations were short, and suspicion was in the air. In the morning, as Lucas and Anna were trying to organize the cabin and prepare some food, they realized Beatriz was missing. Her backpack and a book she had been reading were in the living room, but she was nowhere to be found. The initial reaction was one of concern, but it quickly turned to panic when they couldn't find her after a frantic search of the cabin and its surroundings. The group split into teams to look for her. Lucas and Marcos went into the forest, while Anna stayed at the cabin to search for clues. In the forest, Lucas and Marcos followed tracks and signs of a struggle. The sky was overcast, and the atmosphere was thick with stifling humidity, which seemed to heighten the sense of despair. Finally, after hours of searching, Lucas and Marcos found Beatriz's body in a deplorable state. She was lying near a clearing, with a look of terror frozen on her face. Most disturbing was the fact that her body was covered in scratch marks, and a strange red symbol was drawn on her skin, as if it had been made with a substance resembling dried blood. The group was devastated. Beatriz's death not only intensified the fear but also increased the distrust among them. The feeling of being hunted by something or someone became increasingly real. With Beatriz's loss and the growing sense of dread, Anna decided to investigate the attic more thoroughly, where she had found the wooden box the previous night. She was determined to find any clue that could explain the strange events occurring. While exploring the attic, Anna found an old diary hidden under a pile of dusty papers. The diary was dusty and almost disintegrating, but Anna managed to read some parts. What she discovered was disturbing. The diary belonged to a former resident of the cabin, a man who had written about dark rituals and occult practices he had performed in the forest. The entries detailed encounters with supernatural entities and a sinister pact made with unknown forces. While Anna read the diary, Lucas and Marcos were at the cabin trying to deal with the situation. Marcos, increasingly distant and reserved, began to act strangely, and his absence during the search for Beatriz raised further suspicions. Lucas, trying to stay calm, noticed that Marcos was behaving evasively and unsettlingly, which further heightened the tension. The growing paranoia among the group began to manifest in dangerous ways. Anna revealed the diary's findings to Lucas and Marcos, but the reaction was mixed. Lucas was trying to understand what was happening, but Marcos's presence and disconcerting behavior left him in doubt. Discussions and accusations began to surface. "You've been out of the cabin for too long," Anna accused Marcos, her voice filled with desperation. "We can't trust you." Marcos, with a cold and calculating look, responded, "And why do you think I'm the culprit? We're all in danger. We need to find a solution." The atmosphere inside the cabin became increasingly charged and volatile. Each friend was questioning whether they could trust the others, and fear was turning the situation into a psychological battle. Heated conversations turned into arguments, and the sense that something was about to happen seemed always on the horizon. As the group was divided and tempers were frayed, a strange sound began to echo through the cabin. It was a low, continuous noise, like a whisper coming from all directions. Anna and Lucas were in the living room when they heard the sound, which seemed to be intensifying, as if something was approaching the cabin. Tension reached its peak when they found a message written on the wall of the main bedroom, using a red substance that looked like blood. The message read, "You are mine now." The sense of terror was palpable, and the fear was so intense it felt almost physical. The group was on the brink of collapse. With Beatriz's death, Marcos's enigmatic behavior, and the constant feeling of being watched, the situation was about to become even more terrifying. The distrust among the friends had turned into a real threat, and the sense of being hunted seemed inevitable. That night, as the tension in the cabin reached its peak, Anna and Lucas were in the living room, discussing what to do next. The fear in the air was palpable, and Marcos's increasingly strange behavior was making Lucas uneasy. Anna, on the other hand, was determined to find out what was happening and began re-examining the diary she had found. Lucas decided to patrol the cabin, trying to keep the situation under control. As he walked through the house, he noticed something disturbing. Marcos's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. Marcos was wandering around with a distant, restless expression, as if waiting for something. Lucas, growing more suspicious, decided to confront Marcos directly. "Marcos, we need to talk," Lucas said firmly, calling him to one of the isolated rooms. Marcos followed without protest, but his gaze was cold and calculating. When Lucas and Marcos were alone, Lucas confronted him directly. "You know something about what's happening here, don't you?" Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite his own fear. "There's something wrong with you." Marcos remained silent for a moment before speaking. "You don't understand," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "It's not what you think it is. What's happening here is beyond what you can imagine." That's when Lucas noticed something even more disturbing. Among Marcos's personal belongings, he found a notebook hidden, similar to the diary Anna had discovered. Marcos's notebook was filled with macabre notes and drawings, many of them detailing rituals and practices that matched what was written in Anna's diary. When Lucas confronted Marcos with the notebook, the truth began to emerge. Marcos revealed that he was behind the horrific events at the cabin. He admitted to his obsession with occult rituals and was using the cabin to complete one of his most perverse rituals. Marcos explained, with a disturbingly calm demeanor, that he had chosen the cabin for his crimes because the isolation provided the perfect setting for his activities. He was driven by a combination of sadistic pleasure and the belief that he was performing a ritual that would bring him power and immortality. The strange occurrences, disappearances, and deaths were all part of a ritual to summon a dark entity he believed would ensure his ascension to a new form of existence. "Everything I did was to prepare the ground," Marcos explained, his voice cold and detached. "You were just pawns in a larger game. I needed a group of people to feed the ritual. Now the final sacrifice is near." Panic took over Lucas and Anna upon hearing the revelation. They were facing a remorseless killer who had manipulated the situation from the beginning and was determined to complete his macabre goal. As Marcos continued to speak with disturbing calmness, Lucas and Anna prepared for a desperate confrontation. Lucas tried to stay calm and devise a plan, while Anna looked for a way to protect herself and Lucas. The ensuing confrontation was a fight for survival. Marcos, with cold detachment, began preparing the environment for the final ritual. He was using candles and occult symbols, while murmuring words in an ancient language. Lucas and Anna, desperately trying to prevent the ritual, attempted to disarm Marcos and destroy what he was preparing. The confrontation was intense and chaotic. Marcos seemed to possess supernatural strength, fighting with terrifying ferocity. Anna and Lucas used anything they could find as improvised weapons. The struggle was brutal, with Marcos demonstrating astonishing skills that defied logic. Finally, Anna managed to disarm Marcos with a swift and decisive blow. Lucas, with fierce determination, succeeded in stopping Marcos from continuing the ritual by destroying the objects and symbols he was using. Marcos, wounded and enraged, tried to attack again but was subdued by Lucas and Anna's combined efforts. With Marcos defeated and the ritual interrupted, the atmosphere in the cabin changed. The sense of terror and oppression seemed to lift, replaced by a tense relief. Lucas and Anna were exhausted and traumatized, but with a certain feeling of having accomplished their mission. The sky was overcast, like a mourning shroud over the now blood-stained cabin. Lucas and Anna, both marked by fear and exhaustion, were covered in dust and blood. Marcos lay on the floor, injured, his expression a mix of rage and despair. The symbols and objects from his ritual were destroyed, scattered across the cabin floor. What remained of the cabin looked like a post-apocalyptic scene. The candles were extinguished, and the shadows on the walls danced like specters, as if the very horrors of the night refused to leave. The wind howled through the broken windows, and the darkness seemed to close in on them, as if the forest itself were alive and swallowing them whole. Lucas, with trembling hands, grabbed a length of rope and bound Marcos, ensuring he could not move. Anna, breathing heavily, looked towards the horizon, where the moon was beginning to peek through the clouds, illuminating the way back to town. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice laden with desperate determination. With a combined effort, Lucas and Anna dragged Marcos to the car, the vehicle's interior now a temporary refuge but still heavy with a sense of dread. Each step they took seemed to echo through the dark corridors of their minds, and fear was palpable in the air. The dirt road seemed endless as they drove back, the darkness of the forest surrounding them like a living nightmare. Finally, at dawn, they arrived in town. The sun was rising, but the horror of the previous night seemed endless. Lucas and Anna went directly to the police station, bringing Marcos with them, his debilitated state and expression devoid of any remorse. The police station was calm, and the daylight seemed almost surreal compared to the events of the previous night. The authorities were skeptical, but the traces of violence, Lucas and Anna's testimonies, and the evidence they brought managed to convince the police to take action. As the town began to awaken to the news of the events at the cabin, Lucas and Anna found themselves at the center of a media storm and disbelief. The account of the events seemed like an impossible story to many, and rational explanations always seemed to be ahead of reality. Reports of disappearances and deaths did not align with the town's perception, and the line between real terror and madness seemed to narrow. Even with Marcos in custody and facing charges, the experience left indelible scars on Lucas and Anna. The sight of their lost friends' bodies, the image of the burning cabin, and the feeling of relentless terror continued to haunt them. The town saw them as survivors, but what truly remained for them was a journey of personal recovery. Anna tried to move on, but the image of the macabre symbols and Marcos's horrific face in his final moments haunted her nights. Lucas, in turn, often found himself on the brink of collapse, the memory of the cabin and the shadows that accompanied it a constant burden on his mind. In a final act of desperation and personal exorcism, Anna and Lucas visited the old cabin, now a burned and desolate skeleton. The forest still seemed to breathe an air of oppression, as if the very land had absorbed the horrors that had occurred there. They walked through the ruins, now merely shadows of what had once been a place of terror. As the sun set again, a feeling of resignation overtook them. They sat at the edge of the forest, watching the shadows stretch in the twilight. The sky was tinged with red and gold, a cruel contrast to the darkness that still lived in their souls. "Do you think we'll ever be able to forget?" Anna asked, her voice soft but laden with sadness. Lucas looked at the horizon, where night was beginning to fall again. "I don't know," he replied, his voice almost a whisper. "But maybe with time we can learn to live with it." The wind blew through the trees, and a sense of unease lingered, as if the shadows of the cabin were still there, waiting. The forest seemed to whisper ancient secrets, and the weight of the events seemed ever present. Lucas and Anna, now forever marked by the horrors they had faced, left the cabin behind. They were survivors, but the true cost of their experiences was a burden they could never simply leave behind. What remained was the shadow of memories and the unsettling silence of a cabin that still carried the echoes of terror. As night fell, the story of the cabin became a legend, and the shadows of the events continued to stretch, leaving behind a mark that could never be erased.